My name's Ethan, and I've been married to my wife, Jessica, for just over a year now. We're both in our early 30s, no kids yet, and up until recently, I thought we had a pretty solid relationship. Looking back, there were signs, small things at first, but I brushed them off because, well, I trusted her. We met 5 years ago, had this whirlwind romance, and honestly, I was head over heels for her. She's smart, beautiful, and can charm the pants off anyone. Maybe that should have been my first red flag, right? But when you're in love, you just don't see it. Lately, though, something's changed. Jessica's been acting a little off. She's always on her phone, laughing at messages but shutting it down the moment I walk in. When I ask who she's talking to, it's always a dismissive, "Oh, just a friend from work," or "It's nothing, babe." I wanted to believe her. After all, we just got married, what could go wrong so quickly? We even went on a honeymoon not too long ago, and things seemed perfect, at least, I thought they were. So, a couple of weeks ago, Jessica started taking these random late-night errands. At first, it was stuff like, "I'm going to grab a coffee," or "I need some fresh air," and I didn't think much of it. We live in a city, and she's always been the kind of person who likes to get out of the house, so fine. But then, it started happening more often, and her excuses got weirder. She'd say she was going to Target at 10 p.m. when I knew Target wasn't even open that late. But she'd come back with some small item, a pack of gum or a soda, just enough to make it seem legit. Still, something in my gut told me something wasn't right. I know, I sound paranoid, but there's just this feeling you get when things are off. Jessica was getting dressed up for these errands, not like going out to a club dressed up, but definitely not what you'd throw on to run to the store. When I'd ask her about it, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Why are you acting weird? I just want to look good." Then one night, she told me she was going out to meet some friends for a drink. She'd always done this before we were married, so again, I didn't think much of it. But when she left, I noticed something strange. Instead of driving, she called an Uber. I thought maybe she just wanted to drink without worrying about driving, but when I checked her Uber history later that night, yeah, I was that guy, I saw she wasn't heading to a bar. She was going to some random address across town. That's when my mind started racing. After seeing that weird Uber trip, I told myself I was overreacting. I mean, it could have been anything, right? Maybe she was meeting a friend at their place first, or maybe she just didn't want to tell me everything. We'd always been independent like that, no need to check in constantly, which is something I used to love about our relationship. So, I let it slide. I didn't bring it up, didn't check her Uber history again. I convinced myself I was just being insecure. But over the next few days, things stayed strange. She'd get these texts late at night, and her phone was suddenly glued to her side. When she used to leave it lying around, now it was always face down, locked away in her purse, or in her pocket. It was subtle, but noticeable. We were still having sex, though, actually, more than usual, which I guess is why I kept brushing off the uneasy feeling. I mean, if she was cheating, would she still be so into me? I tried to focus on the positives. When she was home, things felt mostly normal. We'd laugh, watch movies, and she'd even initiate conversations about planning a future. Kids, vacations, the whole deal. It felt like she was laying it on thick sometimes, but I thought maybe she was just being extra loving. Still, I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. Every time she went out, I found myself watching the clock, wondering where she really was. But no hard evidence, right? Nothing to confront her with, just my paranoia. So, I buried it, hoping this weird phase would pass. I kept telling myself everything was fine, and for a while, it seemed like maybe I was right. Jessica was being more attentive at home, and our conversations were lighter, easier. She started talking about redecorating the apartment, something we joked about doing but never got around to. She even booked us a weekend trip to the mountains, saying we needed some time away to relax and reconnect. Honestly, I was relieved. It felt like things were going back to normal. Maybe I had just been paranoid, and my own insecurities were making me see things that weren't there. I threw myself back into work, trying to distract myself from the little doubts that still lingered in the back of my mind. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who couldn't trust his own wife. We took that trip, and it was actually really good. We hiked, laughed, and talked about our future. It felt real again, like the Jessica I fell in love with was still there. But every once in a while, I'd catch her zoning out, checking her phone more than usual, and I'd feel that flicker of doubt creep back in. I tried to push it down, remind myself that relationships go through ups and downs, and this was just a weird phase. The sex was still great, we were still planning for the future, and she was still coming home to me. What more could I ask for? I wanted to believe that whatever had felt off before was just in my head. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always this nagging voice, telling me something was wrong. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it hadn't, not yet. So, I told myself to let it go. Maybe I was the one who needed to trust more, relax more. But that feeling, that small sliver of doubt, it never really went away. After weeks of feeling uneasy, I figured I needed to do something for myself, get out of my head for a while. My buddy, Ryan, had been bugging me to hang out, so I finally took him up on his offer. We hadn't done a proper guys' night in forever, and I figured it was exactly what I needed. Maybe a few drinks and some laughs would help me shake off all this overthinking about Jessica. So, one Friday night, we hit the city. We grabbed dinner, and it felt good to just talk about anything that wasn't relationship related. Ryan's the kind of guy who can always make you laugh, no matter how you're feeling. We hit up a bar afterward, and a few beers in, I started to feel lighter, almost like my old self again. Ryan must have noticed the shift in my mood because he leaned over and said, "See, man. You just needed to get out. I've been telling you. You've been looking like a damn ghost these past few weeks." I laughed it off and shrugged, trying not to give away too much. "Yeah, work's been stressful, and, the usual marriage stuff. Nothing serious." He raised an eyebrow. "Usual marriage stuff? Dude, you've only been married a year. That's the honeymoon phase. What's going on?" I brushed it off, not wanting to get into it. "Just overthinking, I guess. Nothing's actually wrong." "Good," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "Because if you start becoming one of those paranoid guys, I'm dragging you out of the house more often." That night, we ended up bouncing between a few bars, running into people we knew, and for the first time in a while, I actually let myself enjoy it. The beers flowed, the music was good, and I wasn't obsessing over Jessica's late-night outings or cryptic texts. It felt good to just live in the moment. By the time we called it a night, I was tipsy and laughing, feeling like maybe I'd been making a mountain out of a molehill. Maybe I just needed more nights like this, to let loose and stop spiraling into my own thoughts. I went home, crawled into bed next to Jessica, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't check her phone, didn't worry about where she'd been or who she'd been texting. I just fell asleep, thinking that maybe things were finally turning a corner. After that night out with Ryan, I was feeling better, at least for a little while. Jessica seemed more affectionate, and I started to believe that maybe I was the one who had been overthinking. But then, something happened that pulled me right back into that spiral. One evening, Jessica came home from work, looking a little more done up than usual. She had this new dress on that I'd never seen before, hair freshly styled, makeup flawless. Now, don't get me wrong, she's always been someone who takes pride in how she looks, but this was different. It wasn't just for me, she'd been out all day, and she hadn't even mentioned any plans to dress up. I tried not to overthink it. "You look nice. What's the occasion?" "Oh, thanks," she said, smiling but a little too casually. "Just wanted to feel good today. I had a work meeting and thought I'd dress up a bit." I nodded, but that nagging feeling was back, gnawing at me. Who was at the meeting? Just the usual people. You know, Mike, Sarah, a few others. She said it so nonchalantly, like it was nothing. But then, as she headed to the kitchen, she paused. Oh, and you remember Greg, right? The new guy from the finance department? That name. Greg. I'd heard her mention him a couple of times before, always in passing, how he was funny, or how he'd helped her out with some project at work. At first, I hadn't thought much of it, but now it felt like he was coming up a lot more. Yeah, I remember, I said, trying to sound casual, but something tightened in my chest. You work with him a lot. Sometimes, she said, shrugging. He's new, so I've been showing him the ropes. Nice guy, though. I didn't say anything else, but I could feel the jealousy creeping in. The way she said his name, the fact that she dressed up today, suddenly, all these small things started connecting in my mind. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was being ridiculous. But once the thought was there, it wouldn't leave. Over the next few days, I found myself paying more attention whenever she mentioned Greg. It wasn't just that he was a guy she worked with, it was the way she talked about him, like she was excited. Like he was more interesting than just another coworker. And that got to me. Bad. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't help it. Every time she smiled at her phone or came home late, my mind went straight to Greg. Was she talking to him? Were they hanging out after work? Was he the reason she was dressing up more? The jealousy was starting to consume me, and I hated it. I wasn't the jealous type before, but now, every little thing felt like a sign. And the worst part was, I didn't have any real proof. Just my gut. I had almost convinced myself that Greg was the problem, that my wife's excitement was all about him, but then something else happened that shifted my suspicions in a completely different direction. It was one of those nights again, Jessica saying she needed to run an errand after dinner. By now, I'd stopped asking where she was going because it always ended in some vague excuse that left me feeling more confused. So I just let it go. This time, though, something was different. As she grabbed her keys and jacket, she called an Uber, just like she had before. I wasn't sure why she wasn't driving herself, especially since she hadn't mentioned drinking. But again, I let it slide, figuring maybe she just didn't feel like dealing with parking or traffic. But about 20 minutes later, as I was sitting on the couch trying to distract myself with some TV, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our joint Uber account. I clicked on it out of habit, not thinking much of it, until I saw the driver's name. Jason. I remembered him. He'd been her driver before, a couple of times actually. The same guy. It was weird because we live in a big city, and you don't usually get the same driver repeatedly, right? My stomach twisted. I clicked on his profile and saw that he had a high rating, and his profile picture showed this young, fit guy, mid-30s, with that guy next door look. Nothing stood out at first, but the more I stared at his face, the more uncomfortable I felt. Why was it always him? I couldn't let it go, so I texted her. Hey, you good? Noticed you've had the same Uber driver a few times now. Just thought it was weird, lol. She replied pretty quickly, yeah, weird, huh? But he's nice. Probably just works in this area a lot. It was a reasonable explanation, and yet, something didn't sit right with me. So I asked, you ever talk to him? Seems like you two must run into each other often. Her reply was almost immediate, not really. Just small talk, you know, typical Uber stuff. I put my phone down, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. My mind kept running back to this guy, Jason, picking her up late at night, multiple times, and each time she came home with that same vague explanation. Could it be him? Was this Uber driver more than just a ride? A few hours later, she got home, and I couldn't stop myself from bringing it up again. So, this Jason guy, you really get him a lot, huh? Jessica looked at me with this almost amused smile. "What, are you jealous of an Uber driver now?" she teased, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, just for a second, like she was sizing me up. I felt my face heat up, suddenly feeling stupid. "I don't know, it's just, weird. Doesn't that strike you as a little strange?" She laughed, walking over and sitting next to me. "Ethan, come on. I barely even talked to the guy. He's just a convenient ride. That's it. You know I wouldn't be interested in some random guy, especially not a guy who drives me around for 10 minutes at a time." She reached over and grabbed my hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you, okay? You're being paranoid. There's nothing going on." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Her touch, her words, it was all so convincing. And maybe I was just being paranoid. An Uber driver? Really? It sounded ridiculous the more I thought about it. I forced myself to smile, trying to shake off the jealousy that had been eating at me. "Yeah, you're right. Sorry. I've just been in my head lately." She kissed my cheek and grinned. "No more crazy thoughts, okay?" For a moment, I believed her. The tension in my chest eased, and I told myself she was right. There was no way she was into some random Uber driver. But deep down, that doubt never fully left. A few days passed, and I tried to shake off my paranoia about the Uber driver. Jessica was acting perfectly normal, no signs of anything suspicious, no weird behavior. But then, one evening, Ryan called me, and everything changed again. "Hey man," Ryan said, sounding hesitant. "I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how you're gonna take it." I immediately tensed up. "What's up? You're freaking me out." "So, I was out last night, grabbing a drink with some coworkers, and I'm pretty sure I saw Jessica." "Okay," I said, unsure where this was going. "What's weird about that?" "She was in an Uber, man," Ryan continued, his voice quieter now. "I saw her in the back seat of this car, and she was kissing the driver. Like, full on making out." My heart stopped. "What?" I could barely get the word out, my throat tightening. "I didn't want to believe it, but I know what I saw," he said. "I didn't approach her or anything, but it was definitely her, Ethan." "I'm sorry, man. I just thought you should know." I sat there in stunned silence, the words replaying in my head. Jessica. Kissing the Uber driver. I didn't know how to process it. It felt like my worst fears were coming true, all the doubts and suspicions suddenly crashing down on me. "Ethan? You there?" Ryan asked. "Yeah," I muttered, barely able to think. "I'll talk to her." I hung up, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe Ryan, but why would he lie? And the timing, the fact that Jessica kept using the same Uber driver, it all seemed to line up. My stomach churned as I waited for her to come home that night. When she finally walked through the door, I couldn't hold back. "Jessica, we need to talk." She looked at me, a bit surprised by the serious tone. "What's going on?" "I got a call from Ryan today," I said, watching her closely. "He said he saw you in an Uber last night, kissing the driver." Her eyes widened for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "What? That's ridiculous. Why would I kiss an Uber driver, Ethan? Do you honestly believe that?" I stared at her, trying to read her expression, but she seemed genuinely confused, or maybe just a really good actor. "I don't know," I said, feeling the tension rise. "He said he saw you. Are you telling me he's lying?" Jessica sighed, running her hand through her hair. "I'm telling you that Ryan must have seen someone else. I wasn't kissing anyone. Maybe he saw another woman who looked like me. People make mistakes, Ethan. You seriously think I'd do that? In an Uber, of all places?" She walked over, standing in front of me. Look, I get it. Things have been a little weird lately, and you've been stressed. But kissing an Uber driver? That's insane. I wouldn't do that to you. I wanted to believe her. Hell, she was making me doubt Ryan's story now. Could he have been wrong? Could it have been someone who just looked like her? Jessica placed her hand on my arm. You've got to trust me. There's nothing going on. I love you. I don't know why Ryan thinks he saw that, but it wasn't me. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, and for a moment, I felt my anger and suspicion waver. Maybe it really was just a mistake. Maybe Ryan had gotten it wrong. I nodded slowly. Okay. But it threw me off, you know. I understand, she said softly. But you've got to let this go. I'm not doing anything behind your back. I wanted to let it go. I wanted to believe her. So, I nodded again, convincing myself that Ryan had made a mistake. Jessica's denial was so firm, so convincing, that I found myself pushing the doubts away once more. But that nagging feeling? It still lingered. After Jessica's calm denial about Ryan's accusation, I decided to try trusting her again. But no matter how hard I tried to shake it, that nagging feeling just wouldn't leave me alone. A part of me still felt like something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't ignore it. Then, a few nights later, she mentioned going to a party with some friends. It didn't seem out of the ordinary, she had these social outings now and then, and she'd been open about them before. But after Ryan's call, and her frequent Uber rides with that same driver, I couldn't help but feel uneasy again. So, I did something I never thought I'd do, I decided to follow her. I didn't tell her, of course. I acted normal, even smiled as she got ready. She called an Uber, as usual, and as soon as she left, I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and followed from a distance. I made sure to stay far enough behind so she wouldn't notice, but close enough that I wouldn't lose her. The drive wasn't long, and soon enough, we arrived at a house in a part of town I recognized. One of her friends, Emily, lived there. I parked down the street, watching as she got out of the Uber. It was Jason again, the same driver. I could feel the jealousy bubbling up, but I stayed calm, waiting to see what would happen. Jessica waved goodbye to Jason and walked up to the house. Nothing suspicious. No kiss. No weird lingering. Just a normal goodbye. The front door opened, and a few people greeted her, Emily, some other friends I'd seen at gatherings before. It was just a party, like she said. I stayed in the car for a while, watching the house from a distance, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. I mean, I had just followed my wife like some kind of paranoid stalker, and here she was, exactly where she said she'd be, doing exactly what she said she'd do. After about an hour, I decided to leave. I didn't want to stay out all night, obsessing over something that clearly wasn't happening. She was at a party, surrounded by friends, and as far as I could tell, there was nothing shady going on. I drove home, feeling both foolish and slightly relieved. Maybe I really was being too paranoid. Maybe Jessica was right all along, and I was just letting my jealousy and insecurity get the better of me. When she came home later that night, she was in a great mood, laughing about the party and telling me stories about what happened. It all seemed so normal, so innocent. She even mentioned how Emily's new puppy had stolen the spotlight for most of the night. I listened, nodding along, trying to push away the guilt I felt for following her. I hadn't seen anything suspicious. No secret meetings, no inappropriate behavior. Just my wife, out with friends, having a good time. Still, even though I hadn't found anything, that little voice in the back of my mind whispered that something still didn't feel right. But for now, I was choosing to believe her. After all, I had nothing solid to go on, just my own doubts. That night changed everything. I had been working late on a big project at the office, or at least I was supposed to. But by some stroke of luck, or fate, I managed to finish early. So, I decided to head home, thinking I'd surprise Jessica and maybe spend the evening together. As I turned the corner onto our street, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. An Uber taxi was parked outside the house, nothing new, considering Jessica had been using Uber a lot recently. But something about it felt wrong. The car was pulled all the way into our driveway, almost hidden by the shadows. I slowed down, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. There, in the back seat of the Uber, was Jason, the same driver Jessica always seemed to get. And next to him, no, on him, was my wife. They were having sex. In my driveway. In broad daylight, like they didn't have a care in the world. My mind froze, and for a second, I didn't even believe what I was seeing. But there was no mistaking it. My wife's familiar figure, her clothes discarded, tangled up with this stranger. I wanted to look away, to unsee it somehow, but I couldn't. Suddenly, Jessica must have seen my car creeping past. Her head snapped up, and I locked eyes with her for just a brief, gut-wrenching moment. I saw a panic flash across her face before she scrambled, frantically pulling herself off Jason, fumbling with her clothes. Before I could even process what to do next, Jason slammed the car into reverse, speeding out of the driveway and tearing down the street, with Jessica still in the back seat. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I just sat there in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my heart racing like I had just been punched in the gut. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even think straight. The image of her in that car, with him, burned into my mind. I pulled into the driveway, sitting there for what felt like hours, trying to figure out what to say, what to do when she came home, if she came home. Sure enough, later that night, Jessica walked through the door, calm as ever, like nothing had happened. I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her immediately. "Where were you tonight?" I asked, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. She gave me that casual smile, completely composed. "I was at Emily's house. Just hanging out with the girls." "Why? You're acting weird." I could feel my blood boiling. "Don't lie to me, Jessica. I saw you. With the Uber driver. Outside our house." Her face didn't change, not even a flicker of guilt or panic. She just sighed, almost annoyed. "Ethan, you must be mistaken. I wasn't with anyone, let alone in an Uber. I've been at Emily's all night." I shook my head, feeling like I was losing my mind. "I saw you. In the back seat of that car. You think I'm making this up?" She stepped closer, her voice calm and steady, as if I was the one acting crazy. "Ethan, I don't know what you think you saw, but I was not with any Uber driver. You can ask Emily. She'll tell you I was with her the whole night." And sure enough, she pulled out her phone, called Emily right in front of me, and put her on speaker. Emily's voice came through, cheerful and oblivious. "Yeah, Jess was with me all evening. We just had some wine and watched a movie." "What's going on?" I couldn't believe it. I knew what I had seen, but now her friend was backing her up, making me feel like I was going crazy. How could she be so calm, so collected, with everything I had witnessed? Jessica hung up the phone, giving me a soft, almost pitying look. "See? I don't know what's going on in your head, but you've got it all wrong, Ethan." I stood there, feeling completely lost, torn between what I knew I saw and the gaslighting she was pulling off so flawlessly. After that night, everything between Jessica and me felt like it had shifted irreversibly. I knew what I had seen. There was no mistaking it. But her calm, relentless denial had thrown me completely off balance. The fact that she'd involved Emily, someone I had no reason to distrust, made me question my own sanity. For the first time, I felt truly lost in my own marriage. But life, of course, doesn't stop for personal disasters. Just as I was trying to figure out what the hell to do, I got an email from work, an urgent business trip had come up. I had to leave the next morning for a couple of days, no time to process what had happened, no time to confront Jessica properly or figure out my next move. I hated the timing. The last thing I wanted to do was leave her alone, especially now that the truth was so murky. What was she going to do while I was gone? Was she going to be with him again? The thought of her sneaking around while I was out of town made my stomach turn, but I didn't have a choice. This project was critical, and I couldn't just bail. The next morning, I packed my bags with a heavy heart. Jessica acted completely normal, even offering to help me pack, like nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye at the door, telling me to stay safe and call her when I landed. It all felt so wrong, like we were living in two different realities. One where she was the loving, innocent wife, and one where she was anything but. On the plane, I couldn't shake the image of her and Jason in that Uber. It played on repeat in my mind, no matter how hard I tried to distract myself. What if she was with him right now? What if the moment I left, she called him? I felt like a fool even thinking it, but I couldn't stop. Once I landed, I texted her to let her know I'd arrived safely. She responded almost instantly, cheerful as ever, saying she missed me already and couldn't wait for me to get back. It was as if she was trying to convince me, or herself, that everything was fine. I didn't respond right away. I needed space to think, to figure out what I was going to do when I got back. But the worst part? A small part of me still wanted to believe her. That maybe, somehow, I had gotten it all wrong. But deep down, I knew better. As I sat in my hotel room that night, the distance between us didn't make anything clearer. If anything, it made me feel even more powerless. I had no idea what was happening back home, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. It was the second day of my business trip, and despite my best efforts to focus on work, I couldn't get my mind off Jessica. Every hour away from home felt like an eternity, and my imagination was running wild with the possibilities of what could be happening. I tried to keep busy with meetings and phone calls, but nothing distracted me from the knot in my stomach. That's when I got the text from Ryan. I had barely looked at my phone all day, trying to keep my mind off everything. But when his name popped up on the screen, I felt a surge of anxiety. Ryan wouldn't be texting me unless it was important. My heart raced as I opened the message. Ryan, I don't know what's going on, man, but I thought you should see this. Attached was a photo. It showed Jason's Uber parked in front of my house. There he was, the same driver I'd seen with my wife, standing by his car. And then, the gut punch, the next photo showed Jessica, in broad daylight, walking up the driveway toward the house with him. I sat there, staring at the image, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't a secret meeting in the back seat this time. It wasn't some shady rendezvous in the dark. It was out in the open, as if they didn't even care who saw them. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was happening again, right under my nose, and I wasn't even there to stop it. I couldn't believe this was my life. This was my marriage. My phone buzzed again. Ryan, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but dude, it doesn't look good. I texted him back, my hands trembling. Thanks, man. I'll handle it. I didn't know how I was going to handle it. My mind was spiraling. I needed answers, and fast. That night, I called Jessica. She answered almost immediately, her voice cheerful like nothing was wrong. Hey, babe. How's the trip going? I cut straight to the point. Why was Jason at our house today? There was a pause, just long enough to feel like a dagger twisting in my gut. Then, she let out a small laugh, almost as if she was amused by the question. Oh, that? Ethan, come on. It's not what you think. What am I supposed to think? I snapped, my patience hanging by a thread. Ryan sent me a photo of you two outside the house. Why is he there? She sighed, clearly exasperated. I had some heavy bags from shopping earlier, and I didn't feel like carrying them all the way from the car. Jason offered to help. That's it. He didn't even come inside, Ethan. He just helped me to the door and left. You're really blowing this out of proportion. My mind was racing. Could it really be that innocent? Could it be possible that I was once again making this into something it wasn't? But then I thought back to the night I caught them in the car. The lie about being at Emily's. Her flawless ability to manipulate the truth and twist the situation to make me doubt what I knew I had seen. I was silent for a moment, struggling to keep my composure. Jessica, do you honestly expect me to believe that after everything? Yes, Ethan, she replied, her voice rising, as if she were the victim in all this. I've told you the truth over and over again, and you keep accusing me of things that aren't happening. He helped with my bags, and that's it. Stop making it into something it's not. She was so convincing, her tone so genuine, it almost made me question myself. Again. But I couldn't let it go this time. Not after the photos, not after everything I had seen with my own eyes. I don't know what's real anymore, I said quietly, feeling the weight of it all crushing down on me. But I'll be home tomorrow, and we're going to talk about this. Fine, she said, her voice cool and distant. We can talk, but there's nothing to explain, Ethan. You're just letting your jealousy ruin everything. I hung up, feeling more confused and betrayed than ever. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me was screaming that I couldn't. That this was just another one of her lies, another excuse to cover up the truth. And for the first time, I didn't know if I could keep pretending I didn't know what was really happening. I came home earlier than expected from the business trip. The entire drive back, I replayed everything in my head, the lies, the excuses, the gaslighting. But this time, I felt a sense of cold clarity. No more doubts, no more second-guessing. I needed to see the truth for myself. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal. The house was quiet, and Jessica's car was parked where it always was. But that uneasy feeling gnawed at me, the one that had been growing ever since Ryan sent me that photo. I grabbed my bag and headed inside, unsure of what I would find. The moment I opened the front door, something felt off. The air was thick with tension. My stomach churned as I walked down the hall toward the kitchen, the place where Jessica and I had shared countless meals, talked about our future, and laughed like we didn't have a care in the world. But when I stepped into the kitchen, I saw the scene that shattered every last shred of hope I had been holding on to. There, right on the kitchen table where we ate dinner together almost every night, was Jason, the Uber driver, with my wife. They were having sex, brazenly, right there on the very table where we had shared so many moments of our life together. Her clothes were half off, his pants around his ankles, and the sounds of their moans filled the room like a twisted soundtrack to my worst nightmare. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, was fucking another man, right in our home, on the table where we ate, where we had lived. It was the ultimate betrayal, right in front of me, and I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or collapse. Jessica's eyes flickered toward me, and in that brief second, I saw it, pure panic. She quickly scrambled off the table, pulling her shirt down, her face flushed with shame and fear. Jason stumbled back, trying to pull his pants up, but at that moment, all I could focus on was her. Ethan, wait, this isn't what it looks like, Jessica stammered, her voice shaky as she tried to gather herself. I can explain. I felt a white-hot rage build inside me, boiling over. This isn't what it looks like. I growled, my voice shaking with fury. You're him in our house, on our fucking table, Jessica. What the hell do you think this looks like? She stepped toward me, her hands up as if trying to calm me down, her face twisted in desperation. Please, Ethan, just let me explain, he was just helping me, and it just happened. It just happened. I repeated, incredulous, my voice cracking under the weight of my disbelief. That's your excuse. Again. Jason had already started backing away, mumbling something about leaving, but I barely noticed him. My entire focus was on Jessica, this woman I thought I knew, who had lied to me over and over, who had just blown apart everything we had with this disgusting betrayal. I'm done, I said, my voice low and cold. I'm done with the lies, the gaslighting, and all of this. You want him? Fine. Take him. But I'm done with you. Jessica's face crumbled, her tears starting to fall as she reached out to me. Ethan, please, don't say that. I love you. It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was a mistake. But I didn't care anymore. The trust, the love, everything we had built, was gone. She had destroyed it all. Without another word, I turned around and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, leaving her and Jason behind, scrambling to fix the mess they had made. But it was too late. There was no fixing this. I got in my car and drove, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I could never go back to the life I had shared with her. Not after what I had just seen. And as I drove, all I felt was the cold, empty numbness of a man who had finally seen the truth and could never unsee it again. After storming out of the house, I drove aimlessly, trying to process everything that had just happened. My mind was racing, my emotions all over the place, anger, betrayal, disbelief. How could it have come to this? How could she have done this? A few hours later, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to go back, if only to confront her one last time. The thought of facing Jessica again made my stomach turn, but I needed closure. I needed to hear what excuse she tried to spin this time, though I already knew I wouldn't believe a word of it. When I walked back into the house, I found her sitting on the couch, her face tear-streaked, her hair disheveled, still in the same half-dressed state I'd left her in. She jumped up the moment she saw me. "Ethan, thank God you came back," she started, her voice trembling. Please listen to me. I didn't want to tell you before, but..." "Jason," he forced himself on me. I stopped in my tracks, the rage boiling up inside me again. "What?" She nodded, her face crumpling as if she was about to break down. "He's been harassing me for weeks. Every time I took an Uber, he'd make comments, touch me. I kept brushing it off because I didn't want to worry you, but today he forced me, Ethan. I didn't want it. I swear." I stared at her, completely stunned by the audacity of her lie. "You're saying you were raped? On our kitchen table? In broad daylight?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Ethan. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. You were away, and he just overpowered me." For a brief moment, the old part of me, the part that still loved her, that wanted to protect her, almost believed it. Almost. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me when I walked in, the way she had panicked. The way she had been with him, willingly, right in front of me. I stepped closer to her, my voice low and cold. "You expect me to believe that? After all the lies, after everything you've done?" Jessica's face twisted in desperation. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. I didn't want this. Please, Ethan, you have to believe me." But I didn't. I couldn't. I saw through her act, her crocodile tears, her attempts to manipulate me one last time. The truth had been staring me in the face for weeks, and now, I was done playing her game. "I'm not falling for it, Jessica," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You've lied to me over and over again. This is just another one of your twisted lies to cover up what you did." She tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away. "Ethan, please. I love you. We can fix this. It didn't mean anything." I shook my head, the finality of it all hitting me like a weight. "There's nothing to fix. You destroyed us, Jessica. You and that driver. She collapsed on the couch, sobbing, but I was beyond caring. "Pack your things," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "You're leaving. I don't want you in this house anymore." Jessica looked up, her face pale with shock. "What?" "Ethan, no. We can work this out. I can explain." "There's nothing left to explain," I interrupted. "Get your stuff and get out. I don't care where you go. Just get out of my life." She stared at me, her face a mix of shock and desperation. But I wasn't budging. I couldn't. I had given her enough chances, enough benefit of the doubt, and she had destroyed every bit of trust one had left. With a defeated sob, she finally stood and went upstairs to pack her things. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to keep it together. I didn't know what my life was going to look like after this, but I knew it wouldn't involve her. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. My stomach turned as I looked out the window. It was Jason. The same damn Uber driver. He had the nerve to show up at my house again, after everything. I watched as Jessica came downstairs, her bags in hand. She barely looked at me as she walked past, her face blank, as if she had already accepted her fate. Without a word, she opened the door and stepped outside, heading straight for Jason's car. I stood by the window, watching as he got out and helped her load her bags into the back. They didn't speak, at least not that I could see, but there was something so sickeningly casual about the way he helped her, like they had done this 100 times before. As they drove away, I felt an odd sense of finality. This was it. The end of everything I thought my life would be. And it wasn't the heartbreak I had expected. It was more like relief, like a weight I had been carrying for months had finally been lifted. I stood there for a long time after they left, staring out at the empty street, the realization finally settling in. It was over. She was gone. And I could finally move on. It's strange how quiet a house can feel once it's emptied of everything that used to make it feel like home. After Jessica left, after Jason's car disappeared down the street, the silence in the house felt suffocating. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, just staring at the door she had walked out of for the last time. It was over. All the lies, the deception, the constant nagging feeling that something wasn't right, it was done. And instead of the heartbreak I thought I would feel, there was only a hollow calm, an empty space where all the pain had been. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even angry. I was free. I'd spent so long in denial, trying to hold on to a marriage that had been crumbling before my eyes. I'd let her manipulate me, lie to me, gaslight me into thinking I was the one losing it. But now, standing in the empty shell of what used to be our life, I could finally see it for what it was. Jessica hadn't just betrayed me with Jason. She'd betrayed everything we built, everything I thought we stood for. And worse, she'd betrayed the man I used to be, the one who trusted, who believed in love, who thought marriage was sacred. But now, I was someone else. Someone who had seen the worst of what love could do. Over the next few days, I started packing up her remaining things, dropping them off at a storage unit. I didn't want any part of her in the house anymore. I changed the locks, threw out the table where they had fought in front of me, and scrubbed the place clean of her presence. I filed for divorce that week. There was nothing left to fight over. No kids. No complicated assets. It was as simple as cutting her out of my life, the way you would a cancerous growth. And I didn't look back. Ryan came by a few days after to check in on me, bringing a six-pack and that concerned look only a best friend can give. We sat on the back porch, drinking in silence for a while. I could tell he wanted to ask how I was doing, but he didn't have to. He knew. "So, it's really over, huh?" he finally said, breaking the silence. I nodded, taking a sip of my beer. "Yeah. It's over." He looked out into the yard, shaking his head. I can't believe she did this to you, man. Me neither, I admitted, but there was no emotion in my voice. No anger, no sadness. Just acceptance. You gonna be okay? I shrugged. Eventually. And I knew that was true. The Jessica chapter of my life was closed, and as painful as it had been, there was nothing left for me to mourn. The woman I thought I had married had never really existed. She was just a facade, a mask she wore until the truth came out. Now, it was time to rebuild. To move forward. That night, as I sat in the quiet house, I realized something. I wasn't just closing a chapter on my marriage. I was starting over, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. It was finished. And in the end, I wasn't destroyed by it. I was just free.